Hi everyone, Michelle Ferreri here, Member of Parliament for Peterborough-Kawartha, for another episode of People Before Politics. Now this is an exciting one for myself and hopefully the guest as well, because it will be our last one going into Christmas break. The premise behind this series was to really understand the people who are your elected officials. A lot of times, and in the world of social media, we sort of forget that the people who are here on Parliament Hill, the people who are elected to represent you, are in fact people. They're either husbands, wives, fathers, daughters, and they have a story that shaped them into their beliefs of who they are and why they do what they do. And so today I'm very excited to share this guest with you. He was actually supposed to be my very first guest, but because he's in such high demand and so busy, we had to wait. So worth the wait, as always, Dr. Stephen Ellis, which I always call you Ellis. So everybody gets to learn this. I don't even think I've ever called you Steve.
No, I don't think you have.
Or doctor. I do call you doctor.
Often you do. Sometimes I think people don't even know my name, to be honest with you.
They know your name. It's doctor. So you were a member of Parliament for Cumberland-Colchester.
Correct.
Beautiful Nova Scotia, which your tie, as you were saying right before we rolled, is the tartan for Cape Breton.
Nova Scotia.
Nova Scotia. So he wanted me to say it, and he wanted me to say it wrong on camera. He did it, and he caught me. I love it. You are shadow minister or critic for health.
That's correct, yes.
So, okay, let's back up to where you started, because you had humble beginnings, which many of the people on this show so far have had, which I actually think is a common thread, because the Conservatives are sort of known for fighting often for the underdog or for the people, right? So you grew up in a trailer park.
I did, yeah. My mom still lives there, yeah.
New Brunswick.
In New Brunswick, yes. A big place called Lincoln, which is where the Fredericton Airport is. So this, perhaps just a little less than a year from now, my mother will have been there for 50 years.
Wow.
And she's going to be 90 in May.
So it's an all-season trailer park.
It's definitely, it's not something from Florida, no.
Okay, so would you consider yourself growing up in poverty?
No, I don't think that's how we ever thought about it. My dad was a guy, he worked for NB Power. He went to work every day, and I think we just had a very typical upbringing in the sense, maybe it's a cliche, but I call it typically Canadian in the sense that my dad went to work every day. My mom was a stay-at-home mom for my brother and I. There were just the two of us. We grew up playing hockey, so very typically, in my understanding of being typically Canadian. So, I think as my life has progressed, you begin to realize that, maybe we didn't have all the things that everybody had, but that was okay. That wasn't something that we weren't going hungry or anything like that. No.
I think it's funny, right, when you reflect on your life or your childhood, because your point is well received on my end, I think, because it's like that's all you know.
Yeah. Right.
You don't really know any different, right? Like that's your baseline for what a normal family is or what your family is. So.
No, that's exactly it. And I can remember my dad, who's been dead now for 28 and a half years. So he died young. He was kind of the amateur philosopher. In the sense he would say, "Hey, Dad, can I have $20 for a new hockey stick?" And he would say, those $20 don't grow on trees, So, those kinds of things, I think they stick with you. And I would say that really shaped, my idea as a politician that first and foremost, we need to be fiscally, responsible. I'm a fiscal conservative. And, as I met my wife was, her dad was a chartered accountant. And I can remember, my wife will not enjoy me telling the story, but I've told it enough.
Then please tell it, yeah.
Yeah, please do. But shortly after I met my wife, her dad being an accountant, she was used to budgeting. She asked me, what's your budget look like? And, a very romantic question, of course. And I kind of said, well, I don't have a budget. What do you mean? So I was a person, that in the summers I had good summer jobs. I was able to work many, many hours in the summer. I would save as much as I possibly could. I lived at home. My parents didn't charge me anything to live there. And, I had some scholarships to go to university, but I remember there's a round bank, if anybody's familiar with Halifax, that I would go to, and I would. It sounds silly to say it out loud, but I would take out money in cash, $100 bills, stuff it down my pants, walk about. I know it sounds insane. I would walk, a couple of kilometers to the Arts and Administration building at Dalhousie University. I would pay all my bills. So what was important to me was I was there to go to school. I needed a roof over my head and food to eat. So I would pay all those bills first and foremost. I loved books, so I would buy whatever textbooks I think I needed, and then that cash was gone, and I knew that then I could live from September until April or May, whatever the school year was, and start the process all over. So if I spent the rest of my money, it didn't matter. I could spend it however I wanted.
The main things were paid for. That's funny. Right. That's actually how I would say I operate too.
So there you go, budgeting 101.
Yeah, there you go, guys. There's your life lesson. So you went into the Canadian Forces, Air Force.
That's
Is
correct.
that when you got your doctorate? Did you want to be a doctor?
Yeah,
was that always the goal?
There's some more funny stories. I always did well in school. I was thankful that my teachers would say, hey, well, are you going to be a doctor? And I said, yeah, okay, I'm going to be a doctor. My dad didn't finish high school. My mom did, but there's no university graduates other than myself and my brother in our family. And I can, again, my poor wife, hope she doesn't watch this, but she's heard this story before. But I was walking to my interview for medical school, and she's very much a realist. She said, what are you going to do if you don't get in? I said, what do you mean? Of course I'm going to get into medical school. If you want to get in, you're going to get in. Anyway, as people now know, that's not a truism. But that being said, I was fortunate enough to get in. My wife was in pharmacy school at the time, so we knew that that was going to be fine. But we also knew it was very expensive to go to medical school, so the medical officer training program, if you complete your first year of medical school, then you can apply to have funding for your next 3 years of medical school, 2 years of residency, and then you would owe them time to pay back your the commitment you had made. So we decided my wife and I were married in 1990, so we decided to do that.
Over 30 years, right?
32 years, yeah, happily married for 32 years. So hopefully she hears that part loud and clear. That's the
3 kids.
3 children, yeah, they're all grown up now. They're 28, 25, and 20. So.
And you have 2 grandchildren?
2 grandchildren, yes. Yeah, Lena and Libby. So
they're super cute.
Yeah.
But then, is that why you chose to go into the Canadian Forces?
I think, even though we probably could have done it, my wife finished pharmacy school in 1990, so she was obviously gainfully employed. So we could have done it that way. So growing up in Lincoln is just outside of CFB Gagetown, which is a very large army base in the Canadian military. So oddly enough, some of that, kind of rubbed off on both my brother and I, because he joined the Air Force as well. So he had, oddly enough, he just finished a 35-year career.
Oh, congratulations.
And well served. So, from that perspective, understanding that, it was something that we realized and respected, and our uncle was in the Air Force as well. So it seemed like a natural fit. I'm very glad to have served. You don't want to say you're proud of it, but I am proud of the service that I gave to this country. My wife and I were in Shearwater for a couple of years, and then in Comox on the alternate coast for a couple of years. Lots of time in search and rescue, being part of the training for search and rescue technicians, the SARTECs, who people may or may not know. I've had a chance to be in multiple bases across the country and to serve our country overseas as well in a deployment. So, I had a fantastic career. Lots of interesting things, crash investigations, etc. But one of the things that I think is very, very important is how difficult it is on families. Think of it. We were deployed or posted from Shearwater to Comox. My wife had never lived outside of Halifax. So there she is there with 2 little children. One was 6 weeks old when we left. And the next thing that we both knew was I was going across the country and then deployed overseas. So very, very difficult for families.
I'm not laughing at that. I'm laughing because now you're in a position, you do the same thing. You leave your family every week, right? It's a similar position.
It is.
Job.
And I have to say, my heart goes out. Having been there as a young person with a young family, my heart goes out to every member of Parliament who is a young person with a young family, knowing how difficult it is when their significant other, their families are left home to deal with everything.
Yeah, exactly.
So
Yes,
it's
thank
tough.
you,
Yeah.
everybody. We're looking forward to spending the holidays with you. So you were family doctor in.
Churro.
I
I'll
hate
help you
saying
with
that word because it makes me think of the little Mexican dessert churro.
Yes.
But it's churro.
Yeah.
That's a tough word to say.
Sometimes hard for people from Ontario to say. Absolutely. Yeah.
How long were you family doctor?
Well, I oddly enough, this spring I'll have finished medical school for 30 years.
Wow.
So yeah, it's a career that I absolutely loved. I was able to provide all aspects of care, office-based, hospital-based. I didn't deliver babies. I'd done that in my training, of course, but didn't add that as part of my repertoire. I worked in the emergency room, had a chronic pain clinic, the regular things.
He's a lot of experience in opioids as well, right? With your chronic pain clinic. So here's the $1 million question. He's fascinating to watch with the caucus and everybody actually, because he's literally our family doctor. Without him, really, like everything we come over, we're like, Doc, my arm's hurting. Can you, like, everybody just kind of naturally comes over and they just call him the doc, right? Like, it's just kind of how you were branded. But with so many doctor shortages, how did you make that decision to leave? And I know it's a grueling practice to be a family doctor, but it must have been a tough choice to say, okay, I'm gonna move into politics or run for office.
Yeah, I would say probably more by happenstance. I had a resident in my office, and he had been there about 18 months. We'll give Jamie Grandy a shout out. That's his name. Great guy. Both of us had decided at that point. I had said to Jamie, being a new physician is difficult to set up a new practice. And I said, hey, you know what, why don't you take over my practice and I'm going to go and do something else. So he would have had, an office and electronic medical record, patients who respected his style of practice. And so that made it much easier. I knew I was going to do something else. I wasn't quite sure what at that point, but a well-respected MLA from Nova Scotia, who's my neighbor, called me and said, hey, would you consider running for politics? And I knew that I wasn't happy with, perhaps most significantly, the direction of the healthcare system in Canada. The writing was on the wall at that point. I'd had the opportunity to run the COVID unit in our regional hospital and had obviously worked in the system for a long time, realizing the difficulties that healthcare providers face. And honestly, it's about patients. It's the difficulty that patients face in accessing care. So when the opportunity came up, I said, yeah, you know what, I'd be happy to serve the country again. And
why conservative?
That it fits with my values.
When did you know you were conservative?
I think, to me, first and foremost, I think I already said, I'm a fiscal conservative. You cannot spend more money than you make. For big purchases, absolutely. You need to buy a house, you need a car, those kinds of things. They need to be thoughtful. They need to be planned. You need to have a repayment plan. You need to not spend beyond your means. And that has always resonated with me my entire life. I absolutely believe that we need to have social programs to support folks who struggle. There's always going to be people who struggle. But we can't continue to spend and spend and spend and spend. And we know that, you know as well as I do, the money that we're paying now to service the debt is astronomical. And as more than middle-aged, you need to look at what kind of a legacy we're leaving to our families, to my children, to my grandchildren, to understand how are they going to pay this back. $1.3 trillion of debt. It's a lot of money.
I'm still thinking about a hockey stick that's $20. I haven't really moved on past that. I'm like, when did that happen? What year was that? Yeah, I mean, it's really fascinating to watch Steve work, because I actually think having you in, like, when I look at that, like, when I asked you that question, you answered it. I think you're going to have more capacity to help patients on a grander scale in the position you're in, because the healthcare system is beyond broken, right? And we have this discussion a lot, and I think you have the knowledge to do that. I have to tell these stories because when Steve and I were elected, we were elected in the same year, the same election, 2021, 44th Parliament, and we both came for training together. And I remember feeling like I'd never even been in the House of Commons before I was elected, because the irony of this is that in grade 7 or 8, well, I guess it would have been 7 because I never went to grade 8, but grade 7, you were supposed to go on a school trip, right, to go see the House of Commons. I never got to go because I got in trouble for talking too much. Is the irony lost on anyone there?
Yeah, I'm at a loss for words.
But anyway, so when we came, I felt very intimidated because I didn't know a lot of the policy and procedure of how Parliament worked. And you made me feel really good because you were like, listen, I don't know a lot about this place either. And it was like drinking from like water from a fire hose, right? Our initial intake. It was a lot.
I mean, it is a daunting task, but I think, kudos to the House of Commons, some of the training that provide, and to the Conservative Party as well. I think that's important. And I know both you and I spent a lot of time in the House of Commons early on to understand the procedures and practice that are common. And certainly, that was one of my wife's biggest fears when I came here. She said, "You don't even know any of the rules. You're going to get in trouble." I haven't gotten in trouble yet.
Trial by fire.
Maybe
I think it's actually an interesting angle, though, for that. I think it's important to have people who have a lot of experience, like a lot of people in staff move up and become MPs. But then I think people who don't have it bring a different perspective to it, because you kind of say, well, why are we doing it like this? And I think that's sometimes a good disruptor to change what we should be doing. And the reason I was telling all that is the first time I ever walked into the House of Commons, I have this little video. It's one of my highlights. You're in front of me, and we walked in. I don't know if and that was my first time ever, and it's you in front of me. So that's the connection I will have, and you saving my life in Quebec. Do you want to tell that story?
No, I don't think it was saving your life, but. Anyway, I'm happy to help whenever I can.
We have a funny photo that we can share, because we went to our colleague Bernard Genereau's. He does a barbecue, and he lives in a beautiful location on the St. Lawrence. And I sliced my toe open on a rock, and I knew pretty quickly it was fairly significant. There was a lot of blood. I'd never really seen that amount of blood before. And Ryan, my partner, is like, we're going to get Ellis, because he was there. And so we went up, and Ellis did probably the best field medicine that you could have done. How did you stitch up my toe out in the middle of it?
Well, Larry, Tracy Gray's significant other, was there as well. So not surprisingly, we cleaned it up and made some makeshift steri strips from Band-Aids. But the bleeding stopped, of course. Direct pressure. Michelle,
do you guys have that photo that you could throw up? You can put it up if you want. Yeah. Oh, it's up. Yeah. Okay. It was a lot. My kids. So my son cut his foot the other day, and he goes, "I need Dr. Ellis." What do you think we can change Canada as Conservatives?
Yeah, absolutely, I do. If I didn't, I wouldn't stay. I would leave this job. Why do I think we can change it? I believe in Pierre Poilievre. I think that our current leader has an incredible story that I'll use a euphemism and call it incredibly Canadian. He was adopted. He was the son of a single mother. He was adopted, and he's grateful for that. And the rest of his story, I'll leave to the listeners to find out for themselves. It's a compelling story. I think he needs to tell it more, because his story is one of not who you know, but what you do. Mm-hmm. And I think that's important. And I think the final thing for me with respect to the leadership that we have is really related to the fact that we need inspirational leadership in Canada now. We need to have people say that, hey, I can do that. I can be whoever I want to be. If I came from a trailer park and took that time to become a physician and worked hard, or we have somebody who came from an unwed mother of 16 who is adopted and becomes the next Prime Minister of our Canada. I think that should be inspirational to people, because we do live in the greatest country in the world. There are some things that we need to change. Absolutely there are. As you mentioned, we have a medical system that's on the brink of collapse, and I think that we need to change those things. That's the expectation that Canadians have. But with inspirational leadership from people like yourself, from people like Pierre Poilievre, then I think that we can make this the country that we all expect it to be. We have an expectation of this great nation, and I think that's important that we get to that point.
I think you're right. I think you're absolutely right. And I think what I think Pierre's story is, and your story is people who are making decisions about people's lives should never do it if they don't have the lived experience or knowledge or capacity to empathize. So if you've never lived in somebody else's shoes or experienced what it's like to live in someone else's shoes, and with your experience as a doctor in the Canadian Forces, but as for Pierre, you know, and a lot of people don't know, he has all kinds of situations. He has a father who's in the LGBTQ plus community, you know, he has a daughter with special needs. So I think he is really relatable because he has so much lived experience. And I think those are the people you need making decisions for people's lives.
I agree with you, you know, and you know, the more I just had some ability to spend some time with Pierre in Nova Scotia, and to understand the compassion, the ability to take complex topics and communicate the need to change and how to change them to Canadians. I think that's very, very important at the current time. That doesn't mean that we're oversimplifying things. I think that, excuse me, I think there's some people who might believe that, but it's making things relatable to Canadians so that we can all understand what the problem is and how we need to fix it.
Empathy. He's a very empathetic person. That was one of the things Scott Aitchison used to describe him, and I thought that was really interesting because a lot of people don't see him that way because he's so focus-driven and factual, but he's an extremely empathetic person.
And you know, the other great thing about him is he's funny.
He's really funny. Like, he's actually really funny. He's got you have to have a sense of humor here. Okay, so we're going to wrap up here. What has been your highlight? If you were to pull one thing as your highlight, other than saving my life with my bleeding toe. You told me I cut an artery. Were you just telling me that? And then after you told me that, I was like, I think I'm going to pass out.
Let's be clear, she didn't pass out. It's all fine. It's all good.
Do you remember when you said to me, does this hurt? And he's just squeak, and I go, well, it doesn't feel good. He goes, I don't feel a thing.
It's an old doctor joke. You know, I think that one of the highlights of being here is the ability to represent the people who put us in Ottawa. That's certainly the highlight of issues that are very specifically related to, you know, my area of Nova Scotia and Cumberland-Colchester, things that are very important to all of Nova Scotians, to all Canadians. Some of the highlights, you know, wanting to hold the RCMP Commissioner and Minister Bill Blair to account with respect to the difficulties of the Portapique mass shooting.
Which is in Steve's writing.
Yeah, that was definitely a highlight. Looking at, you know, the Isthmus of Chignecto, and I'd like to hear you say that word a few times.
Maybe after.
Maybe after. You know, understanding that, you know, that that's likely to be breached. So I think that's an understanding that we need to make clear of how we're going to approach that. I think the tremendous and crushing cost of living that Atlantic Canadians are suffering with at the current time, being able to stand up in the House of Commons and to bring those points forward, understanding the cost of home heating, the cost of groceries, the cost of running a household, those things are very, very important. And those are things that we hear from Nova Scotians every day, that people are sending us their budget to say, where can I save money on this? How can I live? And for me, that is very, very meaningful to be able to stand up in the House of Commons and be representative of the people who put me, maybe not in this chair, but another green chair in the House of Commons.
It's a pretty big honor when you're having those really frustrating days. You have to kind of reset and go back to that recalibration. Okay, quickly, favorite book? You said you love books.
You know what? One I'm reading right now is
You're the first MP to say he's reading a book, by the way. Okay.
I've been known to read.
But don't everybody just says I don't have time.
I've got a few on the go. It's called Night of the Knives. And Night of the Knives is when John Diefenbaker was ousted from power, depending on who you want to read, but perhaps by Dalton Camp back in the middle 60s. It's quite fascinating to understand. Of course, you and I have been through leadership woes as well, but to see the similarities, but also to understand the difficulties that conservative messaging has in mainstream media. That has been going on for many years, so I think that's an important reflection of what was happening then and what continues to happen now. So that's one I have on the go. I'm reading Barack Obama's book at the current time. There's a book from about John Bragg, who's an incredible entrepreneur in my riding in a big place called Oxford, Nova Scotia.
When do you have the time to read these books when you're doing health committee? I mean, also Steve also works on MAID. Like you've done a lot of stuff.
Yeah.
So sorry, when do you have time to read the book?
I don't know, at nighttime,
Do you sleep?
Yeah, I'm a good sleeper. I sleep on planes, and then I don't have to. I've got other time to read.
Okay. Favorite food?
Wow, that's a good one. You know what? It has to be chocolate cake and a glass of milk.
Okay. And favorite song?
Favorite song? Wow. I'm kind of eclectic, but it's funny. We were out last night, Michelle and I, with some friends of ours. But there's a Steve Perry song called "Strung Out," which I don't know why I really like it, but I do.
I love Steve Perry. Okay, and life advice for anybody going into the holidays, because this will be our last episode. A lot of people are struggling. You do have that background of being a doctor and listening to people. And you've also been in a lot of really extreme, traumatic, stressful situations. You have to sort of have that calm in a lot of stressful. But a lot of people are really, really struggling right now. Mental health, I talk about it all the time, but it's at an all-time high right now, and people are really struggling. What advice would you give them?
I think there's a few things. Certainly from a medical perspective, I truly believe that exercise is very important. To get out there and do it, moderating our intake of all things, whether it be food or alcohol or other substances, I think that's important. If your family is regenerating to you, then that may be an opportunity as well. Sometimes for folks it's not. But to really understand what does regenerate you. For me, sometimes I just need some time by myself, which my wife is generous with, even though I spend a lot of time here, of course. But recognizing that in yourself, some of us are more introverted than others in terms of what regenerates your batteries. So I think that's important. I'm not a huge fan of people making these great resolutions, because we know that as human beings that change takes time. Be persistent. Set goals for yourself. I have to say, shout out to some of my colleagues from the chronic pain world, who I'll actually see on Friday. I haven't seen them for a while. But they really brought forward to me the concept of setting goals for yourself and holding yourself accountable. What do you want to see different? What has meaning for you? And set them, large or small, and start working towards them, because that can be transformational for folks. The
tiniest thing, right? Make your bed every day. Like it starts like at that sort of level. So.
Absolutely. Still do that.
That was a great interview. Dr. Steve Ellis, Cumberland-Colchester MP, Shadow Minister for Health, and his tartan is Nova Scotia, not Cape Breton. And he has a hockey stick somewhere that he got for $20. And I don't know if he still has a few $100s stuffed in his pants. Thank you for joining us for this episode of People Before Politics. From all of us here on the Hill, wishing you a very happy, safe, Merry Christmas. From all of the MPs, we'll have more coming in the new year. We will be interviewing all of the MPs, because I think it's really important that you learn about their stories so that you better understand where they come from and why they sit where they do. And also, we're looking at interviewing staff too, because that's another interesting angle. The people who really make this place work are the people who we don't see behind the camera right now. We've got Dan and Daria, and they are critical, right? Without our staff, we have Allison sitting here as well from Dr. Ellis's office. And the staff are really we are the tip of the iceberg, but the staff are the rest of the iceberg. So thank you to all of you. And again, from my family to yours, wishing you a very safe, happy, memorable Merry Christmas. Thank you.